The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic born alone in liberty.
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 Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
What does it mean to be woke? This week, we will examine wokeness, the currency of the ascendant progressive left, and how the tentacles of wokeness have reached into the fabric of American culture. Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. We'll explain and examine wokeness from a number of angles this week. Jeff Charles of LibertyNation.com joins us to discuss the roots of this extreme social consciousness and how and why corporations are doing the bidding of the woke folk. And we'll examine what full-strength wokeness looks like with the best available top 20 list of woke beliefs, and it is a doozy. Plus, speaking of wokeness, LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza brings us everything you need to know about the trial of the year for the killing of George Floyd, plus other threats and promising developments regarding your individual liberty in Talkin' Liberty.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We kick things off with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out a virtual assembly line of wacky, astonishing, damnable, and ultimately revealing things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. The growing relationship between woke politics and sports was on full display this week. One day, the President of the United States uses his bully pulpit to call for Major League Baseball to move its premier and lucrative midseason event, the All-Star Game, and amateur draft, out of Atlanta because of the new voting law passed by the Georgia legislature and signed by the governor, limiting the virtual airdrop of unsolicited ballots, which marked the 2020 election. The next day, Major League Commissioner Rob Manfred, demonstrating the courage of a lion, caved in and moved the game to Denver, causing an uproar in Georgia among baseball fans and non-woke folks across the land. When asked by the only reporter who asked tough questions of the White House, Peter Doocy of Fox News, about Joe Biden pressuring MLB with his pronouncement, Press Secretary Jen Psaki channeled her president in stumbling, bumbling, hedging.
Is the White House concerned that Major League Baseball is moving their All-Star game to Colorado, where voting regulations are very similar to Georgia?
Well, let me just refute the first point you made. First, let me say on Colorado, Colorado allows you to register on Election Day. Colorado has voting by mail, where they send to 100% of people in the state who are eligible applications to vote by mail. 94% of people in Colorado voted by mail in the 2020 election. And they also allow for a range of materials to provide, even if they vote on Election Day, for the limited number of people who vote on Election Day.
Oh, okay. But in that expected spin about why Colorado is just so much more friendly to voters, you'll find a very revealing and troubling reality. Note how she referred to, quote, the limited number of people who vote, present tense, on Election Day. Not past tense, voted last year, but present tense, the limited number of people who vote on Election Day. See, the left now wants to make voting by mail, what we saw in 2020, the norm. And to do so by making it as easy as possible and actually discouraging people from voting the old-fashioned way. But Major League Baseball is hardly alone in surrendering to the demands of the progressive left. Major corporations are jumping on board the woke train and issuing transparently insincere statements of support for the cancel culture, lest they be descended upon by a mob. Another state targeted by the voting rights activists is Texas, where Governor Greg Abbott attacked the craven corporations.
We have American Airlines, we have AT&T, we have Dell Computers, and we have others who have taken a position against the election law reforms we made in the state of Texas, where the CEOs of these companies and the leaders of these companies admitted they had no idea what the Texas law said or what the Texas proposed laws say before taking a position against it. They need to stay out of politics, especially when they have no clue what they're talking about.
Apparently, the governor doesn't understand that facts are not only unnecessary, but detrimental to the woke culture, which we will continue to dissect as the program unfolds. And a big part of that culture is attempting to cancel all remnants of conservatism, which they can't do, but they can try and cancel its most forceful advocates, especially when it's one of the most high-profile allies of Donald Trump. And that would be Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, victim of a full-on hit piece on 60 Minutes on CBS, in which they focused almost entirely on people of color receiving the vaccine at a lower rate than white people, culminating with a small town named Glade. And then immediately after that, all but directly accused DeSantis of a pay-for-play vaccine scandal.
You have to catch 2 buses to get to the nearest Publix from the Glades. It's 34 stops, more than 2 hours round trip. A daunting task in the middle of a pandemic, especially if you're elderly. So why did the governor choose Publix? Campaign finance reports obtained by 60 Minutes show that weeks before the governor's announcement, Publix donated $100,000 to his political action committee, Friends of Ron DeSantis. Julie Jenkins Fancelli, heiress to the Publix fortune, has given $55,000 to the governor's PAC in the past, and in November, Fancelli's brother-in-law, Hoyt R. Barnett, a retired Publix executive, donated $25,000. Publix did not respond to our request for comment about the donations. Governor DeSantis is up for re-election next year.
Well, Governor DeSantis, much like his close ally Donald Trump, was hardly going to sit still for that.
They knew what they were doing was a lie. I knew what they were doing was a lie. Everybody here knows what they were doing is a lie. They know that we know they're lying, and yet they continue to lie. And they lied, and they lied, and they lied. We offered them the information, and they declined to interview the key people because they didn't want to let go of the narrative. Well, guess what? There's going to be consequences for that.
That sounds like a threat or promise. But of course, the White House, via spokeswoman Jen Psaki, had to jump into the fray, implying that DeSantis is likely racist.
One of the concerns we've had as we've watched the data is that 17% of Florida's population is African American, but less than 7% of vaccinations have gone to African Americans in the state. That's one of the reasons that we opened 4 FEMA sites in Miami, Tampa, Jacksonville, and Orlando. And these sites disproportionately serve communities of color. So we've been closely watching this data and these statistics, as we would in any state across the country.
As in any state in the country. Has nothing to do with the guy being a major ally of Donald Trump. Nothing at all. But DeSantis later went on Fox News and presented this whole thing as a textbook example of the media's bias, not of commission, but omission.
Palm Beach calculated 90% of their seniors live within a mile and a half of a Publix. So when we put it in there, their numbers started going through the roof. So it succeeded there. But what they didn't tell you also, Tucker, is when there was a need in a more rural part of the county, like near Lake Okeechobee, we set up a separate site in a small town called Pahokee. They didn't tell you that. They didn't tell you that we were doing African-American church vaccination drives before Publix ever gave a single shot. They didn't tell you that. They didn't tell you that hospitals were doing shots starting in the third week of December because it didn't fit the narrative. They don't believe in facts. It was a political narrative. It was done with malicious intent and a reckless disregard for the truth.
But on the matter of why the chain Publix was selected for vaccinations, the Democratic mayor of Palm Beach County, how a county has a mayor, I have no idea. But anyway, Dave Kerner confirmed that 60 Minutes had no interest in anything he had to say about why Publix was picked because, big surprise, it didn't fit their preordained narrative.
I was never contacted or included to give the straight facts about how these decisions were made and when these decisions were made, and how it was reported was inaccurate. They've been a heck of a partner, and I'm so thankful that we were the first large county after I asked to come and use that strategy in a very large, very diverse county like Palm Beach County.
So there it is, the cultural currency of 2021. Basic facts ignored in deference to a predetermined narrative. Advocacy journalism dressed up as legitimate investigative journalism. Courtesy of the nation's original big-time and once widely respected investigative TV news program. Quick break, and then we'll return to discuss what it really means to be woke, how and where wokeness began, and just how much it has penetrated American culture.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com. With one click, you get tomorrow's news today with LNTV's Hot Topics and Analysis, Liberty Nation Radio, The Uprising and Rabbit Hole podcasts, and dozens of insightful original articles. And now, you can keep your kids ahead of the curve with LNGenZ.com. LN Gen Z brings a free-thinking education right into your home for students of every grade level with articles, videos, worksheets, and ready-to-go curricula. While the media establishment giants are sleeping, you can stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com and get tomorrow's news today. LibertyNation.com.
We believe that all men are entitled to blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
It has seeped gradually into the American psyche over these last years. Wokeness, a level of extreme social consciousness far beyond anything we grew up with, well beyond the so-called limousine liberalism or bleeding heart liberalism long derided by conservatives. Being woke means a whole lot more than just supporting big government welfare programs or walking around with a Black Lives Matter t-shirt. And here to help us understand the fullness of wokeness is a guy who, by the measure of many, is himself insufficiently woke. Jeff Charles from LibertyNation.com. Welcome, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. So let's start with a broad question. What does it actually mean to be woke?
Yeah, so here's the thing about that term. All it really means is being socially conscious and socially recognizing the issues in a particular society. So we'll take the United States, for example, recognizing that there are issues of racism in our society. Now, some people might disagree as to the extent to which this is pervasive, but I mean, usually when somebody claims to be woke, they are talking about believing in systemic racism, or they're talking about understanding American society when it comes to racial issues that go below the surface. It doesn't just apply to race, although that is what it was originally intended to do, but it can also apply to, any type of bigotry that might have an impact on somebody's life.
Okay, that's a pretty good explanation. Now, is wokeness more a product of Black activists or white progressives?
So the term really began, I mean, you can trace it back to even to slavery days, but really it kind of came to the fore in like the 40s. A lot of it is associated with Marcus Garvey's movement to go back to Africa. He talked about people being awake to what should be happening and what's happening in society and where things should go. It kind of died down for a little bit, but it did start in the Black community, and it had a resurgence in 2014 with the advent of Black Lives Matter and other activist groups as well. However, I will say that a lot of white progressives have actually glommed onto it. And this is usually what happens, right? Something will originate in the Black community. White progressives will swoop in and do their thing with it. And then it becomes something totally different or I'll say a little bit more exaggerated than what it was before. So it's kind of hard to determine at this point how much of this is white progressivism or actual Black activism and where the intersection lies.
So, Jeff, as we examine the most extreme views of wokeness, is the famous New York Times 1619 Project asserting that America was founded for the purpose of perpetuating slavery actually supported as foundational to the truly woke? And is there any concern about the demonstrable historical inaccuracies associated with that project?
Yeah, and this is one of the problems that I always point out with the hard left, because they will take an issue that might have some truth to it or might have some merit, and then they'll blow it way out of proportion. And being woke back in the day was more about what actually happens in American society and what actually happened in history. They didn't feel the need to lie about it or exaggerate it to make themselves appear to be more woke. And now we're in a situation where this 1619 Project, and there are aspects of it that are accurate, but the notion that the nation was founded to be a slave nation or founded on slavery is false. But that's kind of where you get into something weird, because why would you even feel the need to exaggerate it? You can look at America's history and see some legitimately ugly stuff. You don't have to exaggerate it, but there's an agenda behind it, and it's to push their ideas that America is a deeply flawed nation, deeply racist. So we need a fundamental transformation of America.
Right. Does this brand of wokeness clash with the concept of Black self-empowerment?
So here's the thing. Wokeness doesn't necessarily have to clash with Black self-empowerment, although this brand of wokeness does. I mean, if you think about Malcolm X, the ballot or the bullet speech, he was what would be considered to be woke. He was woke. He understood the societal issues, the racism in American society, but his speech was all about Black self-empowerment, Black economics, Black business ownership. It's something that you also see today with the Hotep community. They also recognize that racism exists, but they're not going to wait until racism is over to start building. They're going to do it anyway and then fight it in other ways. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in opposition to Black empowerment, but the way the hard left does it is very much against Black empowerment.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Jeff Charles, LibertyNation.com. We'll examine what full-strength wokeness looks like with the best available top 20 list of woke beliefs, and it is a doozy when we return.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Far more important than my political future and far more important than yours, the well-being of our country.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
We just talked about the origins and full implications of wokeness with Jeff Charles, but now it's time to strip the woke belief system of its public virtue signaling and get down to the bare bones of what they actually believe. Now, this is not a political system where a party wants certain things but can only get some of them because of those pesky voters. This is a belief system of a small minority which has metastasized seamlessly to the broader public, meaning no compromise is necessary with the elite media doing its bidding. So wokeness is increasingly being imposed upon normal, unwitting people who just want to judge other people by the actual content of their character, but can no longer see their way clear to do so in a world of woke where every single word is evaluated for its potential racist, white supremacist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, xenophobic implications. So it's actually instructive to understand what full strength wokeness means, the, shall we say, far-reaching nature of what fully woke people believe. Now, it's not easy to summarize just how extreme this belief system is, but then I found this guy, Gad Saad, G-A-D-S-A-A-D, psychologist and author of the grimly titled book, The Parasitic Mind. In it, he details the full breadth and depth of the woke culture in precious few words, a top 20 list. Now, we covered it in small pieces on the show over the last 4 weeks, but now I want to provide the entire list presented by Mr. Saad as evidence that the American culture is descending into what he calls the abyss of ultimate lunacy. So here we go. Number 1, it is now racist for a white person to translate the work of a black person. Number 2, it is now homophobic for a straight actor to play a gay character. Number 3, it's now racist for a white therapist to treat a black client because the cross-cultural dissonance would make it impossible for any white person, of course. Number 4, it is now racist to have advanced high school programs. Because that means some people would be hurt and degraded by not being selected for the advanced program. See? Number 5, it is now transphobic for biological females to reject having to compete against trans women, i.e. biological males. Even though they compete in an environment the equivalent of starting every at-bat in baseball with 2 strikes against them and have not even a faint hope of achieving a comparable level of strength. Number 6, it is now Islamophobic to criticize any tenets of Islam, no matter how extreme or threatening. Number 7, it is now science denialism to question the ongoing COVID lockdowns. Just shut up and follow orders. Number 8, it is now science denialism to question any tenet stemming from climate change alarmists. The debate is over. It's settled science. Shut up and listen. It is now what Dr. Saad calls epistemological bigotry to support the scientific method as the means by which you adjudicate the scientific hypothesis. In plain language, that means ignore the science. Though I did think that that's what the woke folks say conservatives do. Whatever. Number 10, it is now racist to promote the ethos of individual dignity over collectivist identity politics. You're no longer an individual, but either an oppressor or victim of oppression. Number 11, it is now racist to criticize a noble person of color, be it a famous athlete or celebrity, because, of course, you couldn't possibly begin to understand the depth of the struggle if you're white, and therefore should just, here we go again, shut up. Number 12, it is now transphobic to posit that only women menstruate. Again, with that pesky science. Number 13, it is now racist to publicly proclaim your support for wrong-think black individuals. such as Thomas Sowell or Larry Elder, because they're not real black people, not down with the cause. Number 14, it is now misogynist to note that women greatly outnumber men in universities. Oh, those pesky, unyielding statistics. Number 15, it is now sexist to publish scientific research that yields sex differences that are contrary to accepted politically correct orthodoxy. Of course, we can't have men and women being different. Number 16, it's now racist to point to FBI murder statistics broken down by interracial markers of victim and perpetrator, because you wouldn't approve of these particular facts showing black on white crime dramatically higher than white on black crime. Number 17, it is now racist to openly support national borders, because who are we to say who gets to live among us? Number 18, it is now racist to seek to curb immigration from countries that espouse values that are deeply hateful and anti-liberty. Number 19, it is now racist to request that job offers be based on the merits of an individual's dossier rather than on the use of immutable traits, i.e., your color and gender. And we save the best for last. This one, which proves once and for all the full-on depravity of the woke belief system. Number 20. It is now racist to argue that mathematics yields right and wrong answers, because that might damage our self-esteem, already so devastated from either the guilt of our whiteness or the victimhood of our non-whiteness. And speaking of wokeness, there are woke folk aplenty raising their voices as the trial for the killing of George Floyd drives ever onward in Minneapolis. And we'll bring you everything you need to know about the trial of Officer Derek Chauvin when we return.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now it is time for Talkin' Liberty, the portion of Liberty Nation Radio where we reintroduce our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, but simply put, he's the man we like to call our guardian of individual liberty. Is that a big enough build-up for you, Scott Cosenza?
I love it every time. It never gets old.
I do, too. I enjoy saying it, but not as much as you enjoy hearing it.
It's true.
Now, you've been following the trial of Officer Derek Chauvin in Minneapolis for the killing of George Floyd. 3 separate charges related to the death. Give us, once again, I'll give you the same charge as last week. Tell us everything we need to know about the trial of Officer Derek Chauvin.
Well, Tim, I think it has been a beneficial week for the defense. I don't think that it has been a slam dunk for the defense, but a number of prosecution witnesses. So right now we're in the phase of the trial where the prosecution gets to call people they want to the stand and examine them, and then be subject to cross-examination. And during that cross-examination, Mr. Nelson, Mr. Chauvin's defense attorney, I think was able to elicit a number of facts which will help his case, namely that one of the experts that they brought to basically, they brought a lot of experts to say that Chauvin did the wrong thing, right, in many and various ways. But a number of those experts had to concede that because of the very specific surroundings surrounding Chauvin at the time, it was possible that a reasonable police officer could undertake those actions. So if a reasonable cop might do something, even though that thing may result in someone's death, it's hard to, under the terms of the law, which is that they have to have like a depraved heart, basically, this disregard for human life. It's hard to meet that standard of the lowest murder standard, which is, of course, what the prosecutors are desperately trying to meet, Tim.
Meanwhile, the nation braces for impact when the verdict does come down. Meanwhile, Scott, one of the greatest concerns of conservatives about the election, of a Democratic president and Congress is the issue of the Second Amendment. And now it appears that Joe Biden is coming for guns.
Well, that's true, Tim, but I don't think that there's a problem there for those conservatives, because Joe Biden said quite clearly that the Second Amendment was not implicated with any of the gun bans or restrictions that he was proposing. So no problem, no conflict there, I think.
Oh, okay. Then I guess we can just move on. Huh?
As I count, there are three specific executive agency actions that they're going to take, which are infringing afresh on the Second Amendment rights of Americans, Tim. Number one, they're going to go after what are commonly called 80% guns or 80% lowers. So this is a bit of it takes a second to explain, but it has always been legal in the United States for people who are legally allowed to own a gun to legally make a gun. Well, some smart entrepreneurs decided that if they could create guns that were more easily finished than others, right? So the bare bones thing would be, I give you a block of iron ore, right? And you somehow create a gun out of that. And then you can get closer to a refined gun. Well, what happens is they've made a determination that if they get 80% of the way, they can email these kits out to people who can then finish creating their own firearm with the remaining 20%. The Biden administration wants to classify those as actual firearms, okay, and have them be serialized and registered, basically creating this new class of guns. And here's where that becomes a very sticky wicket, Tim. Where below, let's say I only had to do one very simple thing to make a firearm, like insert one little pin or something like that. We can all agree that might be a bit maybe too much. But what if I just sell you one part to a firearm? Does that need to be serialized, and does that become a firearm? Well, drawing that line is something we haven't had to do in the past because the right to build your own was always respected. Now that the executive seems determined to crush that right, there's going to be all sorts of negative implications.
Well, Scott, pretty soon I think we'll be discussing the rights of someone who builds a gun with a 3D printer, which can fire at least one round.
Tim, it's a very perceptive observation you've made. There are many gun rights enthusiasts who say all this is arguing over nothing, because not only for that 3D printing that you're talking about with that plastic, but very soon the metal injection molded 3D printing is coming. So whether it's in 7 years or 17 years, I don't know. But I know before then, Tim, it's just a matter of somebody pressing a button and having what they can buy off the shelf today. But in the meantime, there are two other things that they're doing. They're likely to make pistol braces illegal. These are very common, relatively new to the market. And then the third thing they're going to do, Tim, they've proposed to hire David Chipman for leading the ATF. And I can only say that if Donald Trump hired Wayne LaPierre to run the ATF, that's the mirror equivalent of what this is. This is a man who is a former ATF employee who is a rabid gun controller. He doesn't think that Americans have the right to keep and bear arms in a way that you and I would recognize. And he thinks, for instance, that magazine bans are de rigueur, and just the list of anything but controlling crime. Or the propensity to commit crime. It's all about the guns being evil with this person, and a full-on assault, an activist assault against gun rights in America.
All right, from the Second Amendment, we move to the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights, and a medical student who was challenged for what were termed microaggressions has sued on a First Amendment basis for freedom of speech, I presume.
That's exactly right.
That lawsuit will proceed.
Kiran Bhattacharya is the name of the student, and this was at the University of Virginia's School of Medicine, prestigious public university, and that made all the difference, Tim. Beverly Cowell Adams is the state employee who wanted to discriminate against Kiran for challenging that person's notion of microaggressions and whether or not somebody had to be a member of a aggressed group or minority group in order to do it at this public event. And because of the tone and kind of, I guess, intonation behind their question, Adams just kind of went off the deep end with a campaign of declaring Kieran, and I'm just saying Kieran, the first name, because that last name is hard to wrap my mouth around, and got them basically to kicked off campus, out of school, and unable to reapply or come back, all because of challenging this notion of microaggressions. And, you know, it's one of those things, Tim, where I think it's a great suit because it's absolutely offensive against the First Amendment. And also it does demonstrate why in some instances public schools perhaps are in fact superior to private ones, because at least they have this kind of redress. I can't imagine. Can you, Tim, how bad it must be at the private academies where no examination like this is possible?
I mean, unless I miss something, I don't think anybody has ever described exactly what a microaggression is. It's a subjective term. Has anybody ever put pen to paper or in a digital realm actually defined in the law or in the rule book of individual place universities what exactly is
it's one smaller than a mini aggression? So you've got aggression, then mini aggression, then microaggression. That's how you know.
Okay. Right. Not subjective at all.
No, not subjective.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to check. It's obviously easily definable for those who are interested in such things. Now, before we let
Potter
you go,
Stewart might have defined that way back when.
I'm sorry?
That was a Potter Stewart joke. Sorry. Long dead Supreme Court justice. Never. Yeah.
Oh, you mean I don't know it? I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. Yes,
exactly.
Indeed. Now, finally, before we let you go, the Biden administration is, of course, in the thrall of the extreme environmental movement and is now looking to set emission standards, their limits on emissions so low that gas cars, non-electric vehicles, standard combustion engines may not be able to meet them.
Tim, it's the environmental crisis, I think is what you mean.
I'm sorry.
Yes, it's not.
Okay. Thank you for the correction.
Which, by the way, is a great way to say it because you know what a crisis allows you to do? Violate
anything you want.
Violate normal rules of operation,
Absolutely.
Right? Absolutely. It's a crisis. I think that this is an important story because it demonstrates the absolute horror that can come with granting administrators in the EPA or any federal agency discretion for what we allow them to allow. So the EPA, I think it's called a Mulroney or Munroney sticker, is that window sticker we're all very familiar with that appears on new cars on the dealer lots. And they have mile per gallon ratings on them, okay? And it's up, the EPA can basically make it so that car manufacturers are not allowed to sell cars that don't meet a sufficiently high rating on that sticker. And they can make that sticker say whatever it wants for electric vehicles because there is no mile per gallon. So they can just change any basically formula to create a miles per gallon that then yields a number so high that no gasoline engine car could ever meet. And so therefore, because the federal law allows the discretion with that environmental regulation and the MPG regulation, Tim, they could effectively ban it. Now, you might say, well, that's crazy and who would do it, right? Well, then if people think there's an environmental crisis and they can dole out special favors for exemptions from the rule and so forth, then it becomes kind of valuable.
Okay. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
Scott Cosenza, legal affairs editor at LibertyNation.com. This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, all available on demand at LibertyNation.com. And from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we will be back at you next week. Same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.